All right, so I think we're ready to go now, and I am going to continue with what we've been talking about for the last 3 weeks now. I think maybe this week and next week, and then we'll be done with this topic. It's a big topic. It's got a lot of both involved details and a lot of important implications. Media and democracy, what went right, what's gone wrong, and can it be fixed? Today I want to focus on digital media. So I'm going to start us out by refreshing our memory. And maybe I should just say really quickly, by the way, of course, the government will be open on Monday for the Christmas week, the interrupted week. And that was a game of chicken that occurred over the last few days after Elon Musk and Donald Trump, not to and not surprising, blew up the agreement that had been hammered out in the House of Representatives. I want to say just a foretaste of what is likely to come our way, and increasingly clear that although Donald Trump is the dominant figure in the Republican Party, it doesn't appear that he actually has the support or the leverage to fully discipline all of the membership, and something like that is required, especially in the House of Representatives, where the margin for error is so small, right? That really a few defectors torpedoes legislation, and so it does appear that although Donald Trump, in ways that we've talked about, is claiming a very ambitious mandate from this election, it's not at all clear that his party will uniformly agree with that interpretation of what happened in this election. I want to say one more thing about things happening in the news, and obviously there's a lot. I'm paying a little bit of attention to the avian flu and the way it's spreading through cows, and I think it's very worrisome as a potential further crossover virus, but I won't talk about that today. What I want to speak about instead is Syria, just for a moment, and to notice, right? We don't know what the new regime in Syria is ultimately going to do, how it's going to conduct itself, what its governing philosophy is going to be. It comes from an Islamicist background. It has apparently moderated in a pragmatic way some of its stances, and seems to be, at least in this transition phase, indicating that it's going to govern in a more pragmatic way. I think time will tell whether that's a strategic pivot or a genuine change of heart in the leadership of this party, whether there might even be some room for pluralism within Syria. But I do want to say one thing is clear, right? That the Syrian people are feeling the relief of having overturned one of the most brutal dictators of the current moment in the world. Bashar al-Assad and his father brutally repressed its people. I was listening on the radio the other day to a man who basically had been unable to say for the last decade that his entire family had been killed. And when I say entire family, his wife, his children, his parents, his siblings, a dozen people, in a chlorine gas attack when they were in no way involved in the conflict. And then the regime told him, and by the way, this never happened, and you can never say anything about this, or we will cart you off to jail. We're seeing what the inside of those jails look like, right? The torture chambers, where it appears that for sheer reasons of gratuitous sadism, people were routinely put through excruciating pain and deprived of sunlight for years at a time, right? Just really brutal, often awful, inhumane treatment. And the reason I dwell on this for a moment, obviously we're talking at length and repeatedly about democracy, right? And about the decay of democracy in the United States and many other democratic countries. By the way, right, the person who torpedoed the legislation last Thursday, right? The Budget Reconciliation Act was, of course, Elon Musk. Elon Musk, I believe, on the same day indicated that he endorses the ADF, the ADF in Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland party, which is widely regarded by most people as a neo-fascist party. In many ways, it appears that Musk may be showing his true colors. This has important relevance to the theme we're talking about today because, of course, Musk also owns the most influential platform for political communication in the social media constellation in the world today, right? And it appears to be more than willing, eager to manipulate the algorithm of his platform in order to favor those he favors in the way in which it conveys political communication, the way in which it prioritizes themes that are friendly or critical of those parties or politicians he likes or dislikes. And so all of that to say, right? Even Germany, the what's often seen as the most stable, most functional democracy in Europe, appears like it's in for a rough patch with the leader having lost a vote of confidence last week in new elections slated, and Musk throwing in with the neo-fascist party. Having said all of that, right, the handwriting is on the wall. Democracy is not doing as well in the 21st century as it did in the 20th century. We should be deeply concerned about ongoing democratic decay and backsliding. The media seem to have a lot to do with that, as in the ways that I'm starting to argue with you. But let us not neglect how fortunate, how lucky we are to live in a country with a reasonably intact system of constitutionally protected rights and a culture that allows us to assert those rights. Here I am mouthing off about Musk. I'm not at all worried that I'm going to suffer as a result. And obviously, what we're seeing in the aftermath of the overthrow of the Assad regime in Syria indicates how precious, how valuable, how important these liberties, these rights are. I think that should give us then pause when we see, right, neo-fascists rising in Germany or in the United States or in Italy or in France or attempted coups in Korea, that it's extremely important for us to recognize the value. But we also need to recognize, despite the damage that the last 20 years have done to this institutional framework, that it's still largely intact. The next 4 years will be a stress test, but we're nowhere near as bad as we could be, and we should be grateful for that. So, back to the narrative of the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at the pre-digital era and mass media. To make a long story very simple, my argument has been that the media system in the 20th century, especially in the middle of the 20th century, mainly the second half of the 20th century, by and large, though it was not monolithic, was mainly good enough for democratic progress, a progress in terms of justice, a progress in terms of public learning about important public health issues or important foreign policy issues, important civil rights issues, to slowly unfold in a way that rendered the century, in many ways, progressive. And that a large part of the reason that this was possible is because the media system, which provides the infrastructure for the public sphere in a modern, complex democracy, was curated by journalists. And another way to put this is they were the bouncers, they were the doorkeepers. If you wanted to get what you wanted to call attention to into the evening news or into one of our wide circulating newspapers, you had to convince an editor who was trained as a professional journalist that this was relevant, that this was credible, that this had a potential to contribute to public learning, that it was not a quack view, but in fact compatible with relevant expert knowledge, and that it contributed to civil discourse. And that journalists, in turn, used those standards to control access to the media that provided the critical backbone of our public sphere because in certain ways they had been forced to, right? The progressive movements concentration on the idea that knowledge professionals should be held to account, should be acquainted with the state of the art knowledge in their field, should not be making claims to have expertise that either they don't have or that is not credible. And the threat of governmental regulation, the threat that the government would use the power of the administrative state to force regulations on doctors and lawyers led them to regulate themselves and I think to set up reasonably robust ethical and professional norms of self-regulation, and the journalists followed suit. And so for a while in the 20th century, there's a culture of professionalism in these knowledge professions, which says we are allowed to and then exercise power, make more money, shape national discourse, administer medicine, and with that power comes certain responsibilities, and we have internalized an ethical code for the profession. But that ethical code did not just come out of the goodness of the hearts of the journalists, the doctors, the lawyers. It came in part from the public mobilization to hold them to account, and then their reaction to that public mobilization. I also pointed out there were limits on the system, right? That there were commercial considerations, that these were mainly for-profit media channels, and that the journalists ended up having to balance, right, what they believed was relevant or edifying with what the corporate ownership of the media system thought was profitable. And that sometimes really compromised their journalistic ethics, that they were drawn from a relatively narrow social class background, and that in many ways the content that they conveyed reflected that background, what people like them thought was relevant and irrelevant as well. And so coverage of the civil rights movement, coverage of the women's rights movement, critical coverage of the McCarthy era or the Red Scare or of Vietnam or of racial violence in the Jim Crow South, all of that was delayed by the gentleman's agreement, the old boys club to which many journalists belong, as well as by the commercial interests of their media system. But eventually, the activists were able to draw the media system to pay attention to these issues. And again, I don't think we should expect that the media system can just go to a new story, a new frame, a new narrative instantaneously. That's not the way culture changes. And frankly, if it's changing that quickly, probably it's not bringing the public with them. It becomes an esoteric enterprise. So my overall verdict here is that this was a good enough media system to do the work mainly that we needed from a public sphere in a democratic society in the 20th century, and that the reason this was the case was because the journalists brought an ethical standard into their work in curating the content of the media system. And they did that in part because they were held accountable, not only by each other, they policed themselves, but originally and ultimately by the public as a whole. I've also suggested that this system has been in a state of accelerating decay for at least the last 25 years. That this is reflected in the number of journalists working in newspapers, the revenue that newspapers are able to garner. It's reflected in the vast transition into social media as an alternative and altogether differently organized media system that has attracted billions of users. And I suggested to you that this media system is organized in a fundamentally different way, right? You don't turn on your evening news or open your newspaper and find a couple different boxes saying, what would you like to have on the news or put in the newspaper? But on social media, you are immediately invited to post your own content. And then whether that content travels not at all or to a narrow circle of people you're already identified with or to a broader circle of people who you have no acquaintance with depends upon the algorithm and the way in which the algorithm measures the engagement of the segment of the audience that it thinks your content is relevant to. If there's a lot of engagement, it's going to keep pushing that content to wider and wider audiences. If there's little to no engagement, it's very quickly going to end the cycle of circulation of the content that a user has generated. And please note that the decisive consideration about how broadly, how long a post circulates, a piece of information is available, is entirely to do with how many users are spending time with it, and not at all to do whether it's with whether it's true, false, plausible, implausible, reasoned, salacious, etc. Right? That in a sense, this media system is indifferent to what you might call the epistemic value of the content that users are generating. Is it true? Does it contribute to learning? It doesn't care so long as people are engaged with it. And this, to begin to preview, presents us with another ethical question, right? If this media system is just showing us what we want to see, where the we is a we composed of millions and billions of people all over the world, many of whom are not particularly interested in being educated, illuminated, getting perspectives they don't already agree with, learning the details of an issue. Um, is it incumbent upon us who care about the quality of the information conveyed by a media system to try to change the media system? If so, what's the most effective way to do this? Is the most effective way to get the algorithm changed, right? To change the infrastructure, the operating system, or is it to change the norms and behavior of the users, right? So if we uh, recognize that it's engagement that is driving this overall dynamic of publication, then maybe it's in part incumbent upon us to stop engaging with the crap, with the titillating, entertaining, but publicly irrelevant content like Cassandra's gazpacho that we talked about last week. And I'm not sure, to be honest, that I'm actually pretty sure that those are not mutually exclusive alternatives, right? That on the one hand, we can demand that the algorithm pay more attention to the truth, the validity, the plausibility, the educational value of the content and use that in addition to engagement as a way of prioritizing or ranking what people will see, or alternatively, that we need to change our mode of engagement with this media system. I'm inclined to think that both of those things have to happen. finally, as we looked at last week together, right, a large portion of younger people are getting their news now from news influencers, from the social media system. They're finding a community of like-minded people online, and for them, that's a reason to transition to a primarily social media based news diet. And I just am right. Got to be as clear as possible about this. This is the news that finds them. It's not the news that has been curated for them by journalists. It's not news that has any guarantee of relevance or truth value. It may be, right, some hothead pounding their desk. I think you can think here of Rush Limbaugh on steroids as what a social media news influencer looks like. And yet, if that's the option, if that's attractive, if that helps you feel a sense of community, maybe a sense of empowerment, a sense that, wait a sec, these grievances that I kind of been holding inside, they're shared by other people, that is leading people to fundamentally not only change their news diet, but also to form new understandings of the world that are based entirely on this new media system, which is truth indifferent, which is, to go back to the language I introduced a couple classes back, part of a hostile epistemological or knowledge regime, right? It's part of a system that does not assist us to think well and think better. It plays into our confirmation biases, our tendency to want to hear the things we already believe, whether or not they are true or false, and then it inflates them. It gives them the credibility associated with not just being my belief, but being a belief that hundreds of thousands of people have liked on Reddit or Rumble or Telegram or Truth or Twitter. Right. So, with all of that in mind, we concluded last week by looking now at the more fundamental structural transformation of the public sphere, which is the title of Jürgen Habermas's Old and New Books, as well as Zeynep Tufekci's account of how the public sphere is being reconfigured through the assimilation of digital technologies. And I want to just emphasize this really, you know, think about how phenomenal it is that billions of people are posting their own media content on a daily basis, and that content is reaching billions of other people, right? This is only possible in a networked, digitized public communication system. It's only possible with artificial intelligence. To go back to, right, that previous example, how does Cassandra Taylor's gazpacho find its way onto this news feed for this young woman? Well, because this young woman is friends with Cassandra Taylor, or this young woman really likes cooking gazpacho. And the idea that billions of times a day, this system is determining this is what this individual user wants to see is a phenomenal computational accomplishment. It also may be deeply deleterious to democracy. So this allows, right, for the dissemination of unvetted information. It allows for us to now be in a knowledge economy in which we have just super abundance, right? Billions of different stories to pay attention to every day. This is in part because there are more of us, 8 billion human beings on the planet. We're better educated, we're more literate, we're more technologically connected. Give me one moment. I'm sorry. Um, but it's also because we have the technology system that allows us to do this. And finally, it has created this vast expansion in connectivity, right? And I'll use myself as an example here. Um, from early in my academic career, I know some German and French and British academics who have remained in their home countries, have remained in the United States. Rarely or never do we see each other. But having said that, I am in somewhat regular contact with them because we're friends on Facebook, right? And so I know what they're working on, what they're publishing, what books they think are worth paying attention to, in a way that I never would have known 50, 100 years ago unless I was writing letters to them, right? And that's a thing that some of us do, but it does take a lot more time, a lot more effort. We've really expanded the ease of social connectivity at a distance with right people that we don't have strong connections with. It is also the case that there's a worry, and this will be the first time I mention this. We'll get deeper into it about the privatization of the public sphere, and I think Elon Musk illustrates this very well. The algorithms that whether it's Facebook or YouTube or X use, right? And we've talked about just the very broad structure of an algorithm that it's allowing content to be posted, it's classifying it, it's distributing it, it's monitoring it for engagement with the segment of the audience that the algorithm thinks would be interested in it. If the audience is in fact engaged, if they're actually spending time with it, and to be as clear as possible, that could be 10 seconds, 15 seconds, as opposed to half a second, it may promote that content to a broader audience. And if the broader audience is engaged with it as well, you may end up with a feedback loop in which it goes viral, right? It spreads to broader and broader audiences. Um, this right algorithm-based social media system is owned, right? The algorithms are the private property and the proprietary technology of the social media corporations that own them, and they maintain that we, the public, should not be allowed to see how they operate because if we could see it, then their competitors could see it, and the competitors could steal their secret recipe, which drives engagement on their platform, and their business model would be in jeopardy. And I think there is something to be said for that argument. That this is why TikTok and Facebook and Twitter are multi-billion-dollar companies. But on the other hand, I also would say the problem then is that we don't have input into how these algorithms structure our communication, our learning, our deliberation with one another. And the result is that very often we see evidence that we are being manipulated, right? And I think that the allegation, which seems credible coming from within X, that Musk altered the algorithm in order to promote pro-Trump content in the 2024 presidential election is as clear an evidence as we could ask for. I will not get into it today because it's a little bit technical, but I will point out that there are biases in this system that may be liberal as well as conservative. It doesn't all cut one way ideologically. The problem is, right, when we're reading newspapers, when we're watching the television, we may not know exactly why the editor chose to promote this story or that story, but at least we're all seeing the same thing. And there's a kind of accountability as well as transparency is too strong, at least not opacity, to the old mass media system. Whereas with this new social media system, right, each of us is seeing different content. We don't know why we're seeing the content that we're seeing. We don't know what content other people are seeing. It's like there are a billion individualized television stations which are directing communication at each one of us, in part in order to hold our attention, but in part in order to manipulate us, in order to produce from us the behavior that the owners of the media or that those who are advertising on the media want to produce in us. And so to make one final qualifying point here, I don't want to suggest that the only thing wrong with democracy or that the only reason that we're polarized in the 21st century or that the main reason that our democratic discourse has become so coarse and mean is because of media alone. I think the media system is reinforced, is located within broader economic, cultural, and political trends. And so what the social media system does in the United States in the 2020s may be different from what it does in Japan or in South Korea. But having said that, I also want to suggest that the media system is producing some of the decay, some of the backsliding, some of the problems. And in this sense, right, to be a little technical here for a second, I'm arguing against media or technological determinism, the old Malcolm McLuhan, right? The medium is the message. No, we actually have some control over what we do with different media. But having said that, the idea that it strongly conditions the way we use it, that it amplifies and reinforces pre-existing trends, I think is extremely important. All right. I hope all of that is making sense. Feel free to ask a question, raise a comment, a disagreement. If there's anything you want me to go into further or something that's not making sense, you know how to unmute yourself, so you can put it in the chat too. If not, then I'm going to start drawing out what I think of as the overall consequences of the digitalization of the media system for the public sphere. And I've got like eight couple different slides here, right? So this will take a little while. The first I'm not prioritizing these. I'm not suggesting this is the most important or the most significant. It's just the first in my list. Um, a shift from broadcasting to narrowcasting with the digital expansion of the number of stations and the range of content available, right? And so if you're into sports, you can watch ESPN. If you're into basketball, sorry, it's a painful time, I know, to be a Warriors fan, you can watch the NBA TV station, right? If you're into football, there's actually channels for each and every football team, etc., right? And if you're on the right, you've got Fox and Breitbart. If you're on the left, you've got MSNBC and maybe CNN. Not quite as clear about that. Maybe PBS, right? But all that to say, the old model, right, when there were three or four networks, was we want to capture as many viewers as possible, as broad an audience as possible. We're generating advertising revenues based on the number of people watching our channel. And so we want to fashion our content so that it's not obviously catering to one side or another. In the new model, right, Fox News really pioneered this model, building on Rush Limbaugh and the AM radio model. Let's capture 20% of the news audience and convince them that no other channel is worth watching. So whenever they want news, they're going to come watch us. And so capturing the intense loyalty of a narrow sub public rather than the limited loyalty of a broader public. And this contributes, of course, to the fragmentation of the public sphere, to the idea that conservatives are watching their channels, liberals are watching their channels, moderates are watching their channels, and the twain shall meet. There's very little discussion, very little debate across the confines of the particular narrowcast channel. Um, Second idea, and this is to think now a little bit about the business model, a little further about the business model. Profit does not depend in this new media system on advertising revenue, not nearly as much as it did in the old media system, but much more so on gathering behavioral data. And here, right, to emphasize something we spoke about last week, it's really important to remember when you're watching social media, when you're engaged with social media, when you're posting something to social media, all of the ways you can be engaged, social media is watching you. Right. And in saying that, I don't literally mean it's turned your camera on and it's seeing what you're doing, but it is watching what you're doing on your screen. It has embedded surveillance technology into your computer, your phone. It is a two-way stream, information coming in, but information going back to Facebook, Twitter, etc., for them to determine how engaged you are, but more than that, what kind of person you are, whether you're right, a coastal liberal or an interior conservative, but also whether you're the kind of person who likes fishing and hunting or the kind of person who likes European artsy vacations in order to determine what should be marketed to you. But note also very often the platforms are not per se doing that marketing, right? You know, CBS is running the advertisements every 15 minutes. They're selling their behavioral prediction model. I can't remember if I used this example last week or not, but my beautiful old watch that I inherited from my grandfather stopped working about a week ago. And I've been trying to figure out where to get it repaired. I'm sure that my Google account, my social media accounts know that I'm interested right now in getting a watch repaired, and they probably also know who my life partner is and that she's looking to get a holiday present for me, and they're starting to hit her with advertisements for watches, right? And think about how much more effective that is, right? Having specific information about the and it gets much more precise, much more detailed. What's her budget? What's my taste? All of that is predicted. This is a different model for making money. It involves surveillance. It involves working models of human personality and behavior in order to be able to predict very precisely not just what works in general, sing a nice song about Coca-Cola, but what works specifically for this individual or this very narrow segment of the users of social media. This is then closely related to the increased sophistication of the capacity for attention capture and behavioral manipulation. And so I know that that's a mouthful. I hope it's clear, right? The social media system, this new media system that has social media at its heart, is trying to do two things at the same time. It's trying to hold our eyes on the screen because that's how it surveils us. That's how it gets the information it needs in order to predict our behavior. But then it's also trying to manipulate our behavior. Let me go a little bit further with this for a moment. Um, let's say, right, they push an ad to Sophia saying, you should buy a watch this holiday season, right? Let's say that the social media company that collected the information that David's probably looking for a watch, and then it's a good idea to market a watch to Sophia, sells that data for $1. Very often, they also are tracing Sophia online, and they're going to say, if she actually buys a watch in the next 10 days, you owe us another $5, right? And so they're really working to make sure that their behavioral models are as tailored, as predictive, as sophisticated as possible. This depends on part on the fact that there are multiple billions of people using this system on a daily basis, so they just have huge amounts of data that they collect. It also depends on the idea that artificial intelligence, machine learning, can handle all of that data and can analyze it much more quickly than any human being could possibly analyze it, and so generate reliable regularities based on data analysis. And then the final thing that this system is doing is it's modifying content or the feeds, what we're fed on the platform in real time to determine the efficacy of the behavioral model and the prediction. We think David will spend more time on this kind of content. Let's send him some more of that kind of content. Let's see how that works. And that's not just useful for manipulating David in the future, it's useful for manipulating people like David. And so it helps us to increase the sophistication of our techniques. Again, I think all of this is basically unprecedented, new. The technical term here is affordances or capacities of this new media system. And it's part of the reason that the newspaper advertising revenues are plummeting because they just can't keep up. They just can't do this. The main advertising revenue is now going into these micro-targeted, highly sophisticated manipulative techniques for getting us to buy what the companies who've bought the data from the social media companies want us to buy. Platformization, and with apologies, right? The new media system refers to the individual um, uh, brand that you're using. You're using Twitter or X, you're using Facebook, you're using Instagram as a platform. And the reason it refers to itself as a platform is, remember that there are not journalists producing the content. The content is produced by the users themselves. That's the very definition of social media. And in this sense, this is a bit like the platform at the band shell at the park, right? Where unless there's a concert in progress, basically anybody who wants to can run up on that platform and say whatever they want to say. And the idea that this has become the new model, right? Users generate the content that gets paid attention to is the content that other users find the most engaging, no editorial function, pure matching of content with level of engagement. And this weakens the relevance and the interpretive power of the professional press, not just in the social media world where they're just other users, other would-be influencers. They're just posting their content and trying to make it appealing in the same way that someone who's not a journalist is. It's also the case that even the New York Times, CBS, ABC, CNN are also trying to match what is going on in the platforms. I'll give you two examples very quickly. The first, you're probably hearing a little bit about this in the news. Where I am, I'm hearing more about it, and that is drones in New Jersey, right? And I'll be honest, I don't really know what's going on with drones in New Jersey. I don't think anybody really knows what's going on with drones in New Jersey, other than there have been a lot of drone sightings over the last month or so. They appear maybe to be larger drones. They appear to be flying more at night. Some of the regulations changed, and they're probably being changed again to bring this scare or worry under control. But I will give you my take on it, which is that this is nothing terribly important, significant, worrisome. It is just the world we live in the 21st century, where people can buy relatively large drones and fly them all over the place when they want to. But that what has changed is not only the availability and prevalence of drones, but also that people are paying more attention to the drones because, in the first instance, it's circulating on social media a lot. There are a lot of people putting their phone up into the sky and saying, "What is that?" Um, and that once it becomes a trend on social media, once a lot of people are thinking about this, looking into this, worried about this, then it becomes impossible for mainstream media to ignore. Because then the people on social media say there must be some kind of conspiracy because the mainstream press is not paying any attention to this. The mainstream press in an older world would not have paid any attention to this, I don't think, because it's not relevant. It's not credible. It's not true that there's a sudden and important uptick in drone flying in New Jersey. It's just that people are paying more attention to it and that we live in a slightly different world in terms of your ability to get your hands on drones. But the mainstream press nevertheless has to go where the social media takes it. It is the social media that is setting the agenda for the legacy media, for the most important or leading channels. It used to be the opposite way around, of course, which is to say that the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post were putting the stories out that influence the most people, and then other journalists were covering what the lead journal covered, right? And now, quite the opposite. The second example I'll give you, which I imagine you're more familiar with, is the example of Fox News indicating repeatedly in the aftermath of Donald Trump's loss of the 2020 election that the Dominion electronic balloting system had been hacked in order to give the election over to Joe Biden. And we know because there was a lawsuit and through discovery, Dominion was able to expose that nobody at Fox actually believed this, right? That they knew this was false. But nevertheless, they covered it. They reported incessantly on it. There was a drumbeat of attention to the idea that the election had been stolen, and this is one of the pathways via which the election was stolen. Why did Fox obviously amplify what it knew was disinformation in a way that undermined the credibility of the American electoral system to its viewers? The answer, I think, is quite simple, which is if it didn't, it lost viewership. And we see this in the actual ratings on Fox in the aftermath of the 2020 election when it's saying that Joe Biden won the election, right? We called it on election night. It was actually early to do so. Immediately, viewers started changing the channel, right? And so, one of the things that's different also about the digital media system is you get your rating data in real time. And in real time, Fox could see if it didn't amplify the disinformation coming out of the social media system, its viewers were going to go over to channels that were. And so it felt it had no choice. And ultimately, it appears it was probably a smart business system. And so, right, the professional press must compete with and often lose in the competition for attention to a deprofessionalized media alternative. What is published on the social media realm is no longer edited for conformity with broad standards of truth or relevance or capacity to contribute to the education of the public, but selected entirely by algorithms to maximize engagement. And I'm irrespective of the basis for engagement. It might just be that I like what it's saying, or it convinces me that people like me are in the right to hold the views that we hold, even if those views are totally false. So those are the first four, and then a few more consequences. the partitioning and polarization of subpublics sealed from and mobilized against each other, right? And so if you watch Fox, a large portion of what Fox is doing is criticizing liberal media. If you watch MSNBC, a large part of what MSNBC is doing is criticizing Fox, right? And by the way, not just criticizing Fox, criticizing um, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, the people who get their credibility from that portion of the media system and vice versa. Fox is demonizing Nancy Pelosi and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, etc. Right? And so instead of having an integrative media system, a media system that pulls us all together into a shared conversation, we have a segregating echo chamber partitioning media system. And that is true even if we're all on Facebook, right? Facebook divides us into segments based on what it thinks we're going to engage with. And so if I'm obviously a West Coast liberal, it's going to put me in touch with a bunch of other West Coast liberals. If you're a Midwestern conservative, it's going to connect you to the content that's appealing to that kind of audience, right? So it's not just that I watch MSNBC and somebody else watches Fox. It's also that even when we're on the same platform, we're seeing different versions of the world. And the result is, of course, that it's very hard for us to come together and talk with each other when we have completely distinct understandings of what we're talking about. Um, Peer-to-peer communication, right? I see somebody's post, I respond to it, maybe I create a post of my own and link it to that post, is frequently anonymous and with distant strangers, right? I don't even know who that person is, and I don't believe that they're anybody I'm ever going to encounter in my life. I've never even seen their face, and so why should I show any respect for them, any restraint in the way in which I communicate with them? This transforms the character and etiquette of online interaction, opening the platforms to coarse, mean, bullying, and discrediting modes of communication and behavior. I don't have to listen to you. I don't have to respond to your reason, your argument. I'm just going to belittle you, just going to make fun of you, just going to signal to my side that you're the kind of person who people on our side don't need to take seriously. And of course, that is highly destructive for both democratic deliberation, where we, well, believe, at least, I think this is the standard theory of how democracy is supposed to operate, that we need to learn from each other by hearing each other's reasons in a deliberative process of public opinion formation, but it's also highly destructive for our society. I think in all kinds of ways, and it's hard to get a handle on this in terms of data to confirm it, but I do believe we're seeing a meaner, coarser society in the 21st century. I don't think this is uniform, thank goodness. I don't think that there aren't plenty of acts of everyday kindness which touch us and are important in reaffirming our faith in humanity. But I do think the level of coarseness, of meanness, of bullying, of indifference to whether or not I hurt somebody's feelings, including in person, has risen as the media system has normalized a new etiquette that is a highly impersonal and mainly disrespectful kind of etiquette. Final point in terms of the overall consequences of digitalization, it treats public communication more like a game than a conversation. What we are seeking is the approval of an anonymous public that is registered in terms of likes, right? And I will put the like symbol from Facebook here, or right the various emojis that people use to express their opinion or their reaction to a post. And we're looking for how many people share it, how widely it circulates, how many people view it. These are what in the literature, very interesting philosopher C. Tai Yen calls gamification of communication, right? That we're in a sense treating our efforts to contribute to public discourse like they're just games being played to maximize the score. And I want to be as clear as possible, right? The philosopher I'm referring to, Si Yen, is a philosopher of games. At least that's one of the things he's very well known for. And when I say games, I don't mean gin rummy or poker or bridge. I mean online games like World of Warcraft or various first person shooter games or games where you build a community with other people. Right, literally build a town or a city together. And I think it's worthwhile noting, right, that game playing has displaced movie watching as the most profitable entertainment industry in the world today. If you're under 40 years old, and by the way, I have a lot of colleagues who are a lot older than that who are part of this world too, but especially for people under 40, this is just assumed. I ask my students at Sarah Lawrence, are you playing these kinds of games? Everybody raises their hands. It's universal. And so the idea that you're used to getting a score for how you perform and interact with other people online is migrating out of the gaming world into the social media world, or maybe these two are reinforcing each other, even if they were independently created. And the result is that we bypass the qualitative dimensions of interpersonal communication. Do my reasons, my claims, my opinions seem to be valid to you? If not, are you reacting against what I'm saying or how I'm saying it, or are you skeptical because you don't see the evidence for it? And what could I do to maybe reach you with my claim, right? That's all part of the interpersonal dynamic of communication. It tends to work best face to face, but I will point out to you that in the 20th century, one of the reasons that our broadcast journalists were often admired by large swaths of the public is you felt like they were talking to you, like it was a conversation. And what we're seeing online does not have that feel anymore. So I think I had better stop there today. We've used our time. As you can hear, I'm also struggling a little bit with my cold, but I want to hear your comments, your thoughts. I've again provided, I hope, a fair bit of information. Um, Anybody want to start us out with a reaction, a thought, a question? Go ahead, Flossie, but remember to unmute yourself, please. You're still muted, Flossie. You got to hit that space bar.
Now,
Yeah, you got it now.
okay. It's odd, it's strange, but listening to you, it makes me uneasy. I received a telephone call from someone I do not know. I couldn't hear his name, but there was a phone number where I could reach him. And he wondered, or even was insisting, that Trump was working on surveys. He mentioned the name Trump. Would I be interested in helping out to work on a survey? Now, why? I don't, admittedly, no, I have some slight reputation, but not that kind of reputation. It's scary because there is a phone number. I can call that phone number and say, I'm not interested. But if there is a phone number and I have registered myself as being not interested, that also puts me in a special kind of category. Now, where in the world this is coming from? Well, I have two phone numbers. Do I report the phone numbers to the FBI or do I just pretend that I haven't been invited or I haven't heard this kind of thing and just forget about it and live peacefully?
Yeah, and I think you're pointing out something that is definitely rampant with this new communication system, this digitalized network communication system, which is people are scamming all over the place. And so my advice to you would be don't cooperate, right? Don't provide them any information. I mean, unless it's clear to you that this is a credible enterprise and that there's some reason for you to do it, I think you err on the side of caution right now. I, around once a month, get an email or sometimes a text message from somebody who claims to be the provost of my university. And by the way, I know the provost. We've been colleagues for a very long time, and it's her name, right? And it's saying, I need a favor, David. Can you go get a gift card from Amazon for me? There's a birthday party this afternoon and I don't have time to do it. Right? And this is called phishing with a PH, right? This is a very standard form of online scamming. And I will just point out to you, there are a lot of people who lose a lot of money, many of them, frankly, elderly, who are not up to speed with this new communication system and who get a little, right, befuddled by, wait a sec, is that really my daughter, my cousin, my granddaughter reaching out to me? Have they really been in an automobile accident? If so, do I really need to send them money right now? You know, that they're very sophisticated, they're very manipulative, and there's a lot of it going on. So yeah, I think it's appropriate to be cautious, Flossie. Anybody else for today? Is this making sense? And I hope providing new information.
I want to say it's Sandy, not Michael.
Right. Hi, Sandy.
The model of bullying online, uh, it comes from Trump. He set that up years ago, and now it's become normalized.
I want to say I'm not completely in agreement with you, Sandy. And what I would say, and I think it's one of the things that Donald Trump's success can be traced to. He was spending more time in this world earlier than were most American politicians. And the result was that he understood the etiquette of the online world. He understood that there were people out there who would actually support him if he was more of a bully, if he was more menacing. And so it's not just Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump in many ways is not possible without and is a byproduct of this new media environment. He has accelerated it, he has amplified it, he has succeeded within it in a way that has opened the horizons of possibility to politicians all over the world, right? And so I don't want to be kind to Donald Trump, but I also just want to be clear. I don't think he originated the online bullying. I think it was there before he got there and he took it up. It definitely is in keeping with his personality. I think he's probably been a bully his whole life, but the idea that the norms, the etiquette restrained him from doing that publicly until social media changed, and then he was all too happy to do this from as big a bully pulpit as we would provide him. And by the way, it just keeps growing, unfortunately. Yeah, so thank you for that comment, Sandy. I hope you don't mind my
Thanks.
pushing back a little bit.
No, no, that makes sense. Do you think that we will ever get control of this? I mean, it's very scary.
I don't think we're going to get control of it unless there is a concerted political movement to do so. And so I'll just take you back for a moment to the last third of the 19th century in the United States, right? Where the big railroads, the big oil companies, the big banks, the big agricultural businesses seem to just be running away with all of the power in our society. And people organized to take that power back. And we are going to have to not wait for this system to reform itself, right? Way too many people are making too much money. Way too many people are using it to their benefit. We're going to have to demand different conduct from the people who own these platforms. In particular, I want to say the people who work for them, right? To say, wait a sec, don't just engineer it to be maximally manipulative. What kind of person are you, right? This is something that is ultimately going to poison the culture that you belong to. And then, right, also of each other, right? Don't just fall for the clickbait, for the rage bait. I don't know if these terms are familiar or not, but for the most salacious, most outrageous content that comes onto your screen, take a second, take a breath, and say, is there any reason I should pay any attention to that? And if you stop paying attention to it, the algorithm will stop promoting it. So there is a sense in which we have a fair bit of control, but there's a what we call collective action problem. How can all of us at the same time stop being drawn in to the bad content? And go ahead. While you're doing that, I'm going to go away for 2 seconds because I got to plug in or my computer will die. But I'm listening. Go ahead, Ann.
I'm wondering, there is now a lawsuit between two influencers. And I'm just occurred to me in this conversation that that might have some effect, because presumably whatever the influencers do, it's their they're at home and they're doing whatever they're doing on a personal basis. Of course, they pay a lot of attention to everybody else. So I'm just wondering if that kind of pressure from one to another among the influencers will have something to do with honesty and content.
Um, so I think I know what you're referring to, Ann. And if I have it right, there's two influencers, one of whom accuses the other of essentially stealing her style and her persona. Is that what you're referring to, Ann?
That was,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. And so I think we're gonna have to wait and see, but I'm kind of skeptical, frankly, that this is gonna succeed in court, right? I'm wearing a blazer and a button-down shirt because that's the way professors dress. Did I steal that style from someone? I look at the pictures of those two women. Yeah, they do dress kind of similarly, but so do a lot of other women, right? It doesn't seem to me the idea that somehow you can own just the way you dress, right? That it's a stretch, and we'll have to see. I mean, obviously, Madonna has sued people for stealing aspects of her persona, but I tend to think her persona is much more distinctive and much more associated with her art. And that might be part of the reason that she had greater success in bringing those suits. Having said all that, even if that suit succeeds, it's not a suit that says, you misled me. the information you provided was unreliable or bad. My emotions have been manipulated by you, and now I'm an angrier, meaner person. I do think, and this is where we'll go next week. Some of the work that the Surgeon General has done, some of the work that other scholars have done to demonstrate we are different people. Our beliefs are distorted and manipulated. Our emotions are raw and mean because of the time we spend on this media system, and it's bad for us, right? That's, to my mind, the conversation we need to be having. Not did somebody steal somebody else's style, right? And once we have that conversation, of course, there's a question: what do we do about it? And I do think legal reform is part of the solution, but I do think it's actually limited, especially in a country with the First Amendment that really constrains what we can do to regulate media. Um, so I would argue that we need something like a public health campaign, right? We didn't make cigarettes illegal, but we really made it clear this is bad for you, right? And you're going to regret the time in your 20s when you were puffing away 2 packs a day by the time you get to be your 60s, your 70s, right? You're going to regret the amount of time you spend on social media when you get to be in your 70s and your 80s and you say, wait a sec, I lost a decade of my life to that crap, right? We need to not just try to do this by law. I think we need to do it by ethics, by culture, and public health campaigns give us a pretty good model for that.
I
So,
think,
so that's where I'm going with this, Anne.
yeah,
If,
but
if it
I think
helps
that that
everyone.
was my point, not that that should be solved through the courts,
Hmm.
but this might start a conversation.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, that somebody might not, it just might start people thinking about how this is used and how we're manipulated.
Interesting. Well, I certainly hope you're right, Anne.
So do I.
I wonder where we get to the tipping point where we say, wait a sec, what are we doing, right? And here I'll just point out, right? I don't have a number for you, but I'm going to throw out the idea that hundreds of thousands of people died from COVID because they believed disinformation propagated online
Mhm.
rather than listening to public health officials, listening to doctors, listening to the people who love them, right? And if that didn't lead us to have this conversation, I worry that it's not going to come from some catalyst, right? Some spontaneous event in our environment. As opposed to that, I think it's really going to have to be a whole bunch of people organizing and saying, this has gone too far, and we need our fellow members of the public to begin to moderate their social media diets before we get any further with this. All right, everyone. I enjoyed being with you today. I know this is the last time we get together before the holidays, so I want to be sure to wish you happy holidays. I like taking occasions like this to just point out how much I enjoy my Saturday mornings with you all. It's been going on for many years now, and it's a real joy. So be well, and I'll see you one more time this year to maybe finish out this series of talks. Enjoy the holidays, everybody. Take care. Bye bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, David.
Pleasure as always. Take care. Thank you. Bye bye.